Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm displaying the antitrust policy notice as always. Everyone should have received the slides in the email, which also contains the antitrust policy notice. As usual, our policy is available in the website in full, and if you have any questions, you can contact Andrew Updegrove of the law firm Gesmer Updegrove, who provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation. Our agenda today is back to our good old hardcore days of looking at how we help people with reference material and so on. But before we do that, let's do our roll call and project update. I'll just read through who I can see.
Hi, this is Mary.
Oh, hey, hello. I'm going to read through who I can see, and there's a couple of numbers that I can't see. And I'll call people out. So I see Hans, Alexius, Nicole, Marcel, Alex, Indira, Gary, Sammy, Ron, Jake, Andreas, Andrew. We've got Miriam on one of the German calls, I believe, dialing in. Who's on the second German number? Okay. We'll just let that one roll. I've got someone marked as San Diego. I'm guessing that is probably Jim Hutchinson or Nathan.
Jim Hutchinson. Thank you, Shane.
Hey, welcome. We've got Mark Giese. We've got Russ. And we have +41 number. Not sure who that is. If I've missed your name, please let me know who you are. We're just recording our minutes as usual. Okay, assuming that's everyone, onto our project update. Okay, so let's kick off with the COVID-19 updates. We've been hit hard across Asia. Some countries are in quite substantial lockdown. So, as you are probably aware, there has been around 120 million people in quarantine in China, and there's been knock-on effects in cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, where a lot of services have shut down. For this reason, our China work group has decided not to hold physical meetings for the next month or two at least, but we are holding a virtual meeting in approximately 9 hours. We'll be having the China work group first virtual meeting, so we can continue momentum as expected. The goal, of course, is 1 meeting per quarter. In Japan, we're on a bi-monthly schedule, but we have had a cancellation. We were meant to be at DNA in Tokyo, but due to the rapid spread of the virus in Japan, we've had to defer that meeting. We're still looking at how we can continue our work in Q1. There has been a meeting of our planning group a couple of days ago, and activities are still rolling online. South Korea, same deal. As you probably know, South Korea has the highest incident of cases outside of China, though Italy is catching up. And we have suspension of gatherings there. We do expect to have normal service resuming in South Korea as soon as possible, and naturally, telemeetings are an option. Taiwan, same story. Taiwan is actually containing the virus pretty well, but out of an abundance of caution, and the reason they're containing it, most face-to-face meetings are cancelled. However, SC, Lucian, and Florence are working hard to make sure that we don't lose any momentum there. Long story short, physical meetings are out in Asia at the moment. We're trying to work through it. We're working on remote meetings where appropriate. In some countries like Japan, that may be a bit more difficult, but we do not expect to lose core momentum on activities to support our ISO standardization. Membership Summit in North America. I canceled my trip to the Membership Summit because the risk of carrying the virus was too great. We have an unknown number of people infected in Japan. With only 2,800 people tested, approximately 10% are positive. The virus is in 3 of the 4 prefectures on my island right now. However, we will be going full steam ahead at the Membership Summit. Jeff McAfee has agreed to give people the latest information on the OpenChain project during the to-do group meeting on the 9th of March. That's in the morning, I believe. On the afternoon of the 9th of March, our governing board is having their first meeting of the kind of final ISO stage of the project. That'll be where we lock down details like our budget and so on allocation for Q2, 3, and 4. We will be having some changes due to the COVID-19 situation, but as with the Asian meetings, we don't expect any interruption to core services. It's really just a case of reallocating. And finally, there's an OpenChain talk scheduled for the 12th of March about the OpenChain specification and how we made the ISO draft and so on. I was going to deliver that talk, but Mark Giese has very kindly stepped forward and will fill my place there. For those of you who don't know, Mark Giese is the lead of the OpenChain spec work team and is the person who shepherded it through 4 iterations over these years and has had a key role in the ISO draft. Mark, thank you so much for stepping up and making sure the OpenChain talk is front and center. We also have an OpenChain panel, and I believe that some of our key people will be on that panel. I think, Sammy, you're one of the lead people on this particular panel about the journey to conformance. Is it on the 11th or 12th?
Yeah, unfortunately, Shane, as you would have seen, I am no longer able to make it to the to the membership summit. So very disappointing, but obviously there has been quite nervousness around travel. So all our travel within ARM has been scaled back significantly. So I had to cancel my trip. I do have a meeting with Nithya and Matt and Max after this call to discuss how we're going to move it forward. They're certainly not going to be providing remote access to the conference, so I won't be able to join.
Fingers crossed that because they're local to the area, more or less, Matt, and Nithya will be able to continue it. Really sorry, but entirely understandable that your travel is restricted. I've noticed globally it's been a dramatic reduction of travel, and good reason. So apart from the membership summit, where OpenChain will have a pretty good presence, as you've heard, looks like we'll have a nice panel about Journey to Conformance. We'll have a good talk about the ISO spec. We'll have a to-do group representation for us. We'll have a board meeting, which Dave Marr has kindly agreed to sit in, well, as always, as the chair, but sit in as the person running the meeting throughout. Everything's on schedule, and that looks good for Membership Summit. Meanwhile, OpenChain has been exposed to some nice audiences via DLA Piper. They're running in-house council meetings every quarter, and they gave us some nice space last week to run through OpenChain as a standard. And I've been participating in the United Nations Innovation Technology Labs, talking about OpenChain and representing how that works. The Innovation Technology Labs are essentially creating an analysis point for projects and policy around open source. And of course, OpenChain fits into that naturally, and that's why I'm there. ISO status, we're doing fine. We've had some feedback from our ISO mentor. The document for final submission is just about ready. I hope to have that completed tomorrow. And everything's looking on schedule. As we said, we could be an ISO standard as early as April, definitely first half of this year. And regardless of travel and so on, that is moving solidly ahead. We have had conformance growth status. We've got some interesting people who are conformant, including our first bank, which happens to be an Asian bank, just waiting for their formal announcement. We've had a lot of people come up to the project and work on conformance related to areas like automotive, where we have significant traction. You'll see a series of announcements in the next couple of weeks. Partner growth as well. We have right now 6 new confirmed partners keying up their announcement schedules. So plenty of momentum there. We are going to try to have our OpenChain Germany workgroup continue meetings on schedule, and we'll be launching our OpenChain North America workgroup. Fingers crossed we might be able to do it at the membership summit. If not, we'll hold it at one of our member companies as soon as this viral problem clears up. All right, let's move on to reference material and project files. This is the big one. So we've been talking for quite a while about trying to tidy up all of the various repositories in the OpenChain GitHub. And it took a while, but I've been working on this for a bit, and I've been able to consolidate our 46 repositories down to 12. We're now able to provide simple access and review of core material of the project. So reference material is easy to click through and find. The specification and translations are again consolidated and easy to find. Image assets for people to do promotion, again, same deal. All of them are being located in one space. And finding our project charter and various agreements like the partner program agreement is now simpler. Discovery is a key thing. We have so much material now that people were having trouble finding it. So having a clear hierarchy to allow that is critical, especially as we have a lot of new companies coming in. For instance, I was just talking with a French automotive company today. They're very interested in OpenChain. They're planning to be part of what we do, but they were having trouble discovering all of the reference material they wanted. So this is one of the things to directly address that. Another is to make us multiple language from first principle, to make sure that the translations, well, all language versions of the files are adjacent and easy to find. So in a nutshell, I've gone ahead and consolidated the material as we've talked about for quite a few months. And naturally, people are free and encouraged to improve on that and make it better. And I know that people like Alexios have a great deal of experience in discoverability around material. So I'm hoping that this is a first step. Now let me show you what exactly I've done. So this is what our reference material repository looks like now. I'm just going to try and, there we go. Okay, can you see this relatively clearly on the screen?
Sure.
All right. So as you'll see, essentially we have categories like case studies, checklists, FAQs, flowcharts, guides, workflows, templates, supplier leaflet, training slides. So it's easy to begin working in there. And then in each area, where appropriate, there's a split between community and official. So let me just look at case studies, open it up. There's a vast swathe of community contributed case studies. And there are several official case studies. And when it comes to material presentation, when you go into where the material is, it's split by language. Let me demonstrate that more clearly in an area where we have multiple languages and so on. So let's go into the guides. We have a lot of guide material. If you look at the official thing, we have things like OpenChain for managers, our infographic, our onboarding handout, and so on. When you look at one particular item, let's pick one with multiple languages, the onboarding handout. When you click it, it opens up with the first view of the language type of files, and then the material inside. And this allows us to put different versions in each language depending on where people are at with translation, but makes it really clear that the onboarding handout is available in these particular languages. The same applies to everything. So the onboarding slides, again, it's got that one-page overview only in English, so it's under EN, one slide only in English, and so on. Pretty intuitive. We do expect that this will make it easier for people in discovering the material to translate it more quickly. For instance, let's take the infographic, which everyone loves. All of the versions, including the editable versions, are very easily available on the repo now, and you can very quickly understand how to contribute your translation. So the material across the community is pretty heavy. Let's say the checklists, we don't actually have an official checklist, but we have conformance compliance checklist, general compliance and rebuilding checklist, and merger and acquisition checklist. Some of them are translated into English and Japanese, some are just in English. And throughout the project, all of the material is presented in this manner. And when it comes to, for instance, discovering the official material, if there's choice, like under templates, we have community templates in Japanese, and we have official templates in English, people can very rapidly see what's actually part of the core project and what's not. Case studies, same deal, official English and right there. Hopefully people will be able to translate these. I'm going to make sure that the assets for source are put into this place really soon. I was organizing 395 different files to bring this together, so it was a pretty substantial work to do it. But it's worth it, I believe, to ensure that we have good discoverability throughout the project. Are there any questions at this juncture about how this is done, what it means? All right, I'm going to just show you.
And the previous repositories
They're
are archived and yeah.
Exactly. Everything that's old is archived and read-only, and everything that was there, including things like translation tools, is right here. So if we go into, let's say, we're into checklists, community, conformance compliance checklist. The Japanese team didn't just translate it, they used Omega T translation tools, and that's kept and it's there. And in every instance where people use translation tools and so on, it's right beside their translation so they can quickly get to it. The other repositories are archived, but if something has gone wrong, if someone needs to change things around, we can unarchive as needed. But the archived repositories, for those not familiar with it, are read-only. Everything there is still available. You can download the material, you can clone the repository, all of that. I hope that answers the question effectively.
Sure. It's just that we lost the history, but yeah, it's over there.
Yeah, it's referenceable back there.
Yeah. Okay.
So, couple of things to show you. I had opened up guides, and I didn't open community. So the official guides. Oopsie daisy. What happened there? Oh yeah. Sometimes this zoomy thing doesn't work very well. Okay, let me try zooming into our guides again. So the guides that you can see here under official are pretty substantive. OpenChain for managers, introductions like infographic, onboarding handout, onboarding slides, and we actually have quite a few translations, the onboarding handout in English, Japanese, Portuguese, and simplified Chinese. But when it comes to guides, actually the truly amazing thing is the community guides. We have just a ton of guides here. For instance, the assessment of open source for merger and acquisition, which is basically a book about how to use things like OpenChain for M&A. We've got the LF version, which is ready for print, and we've got the source code for people to use it as they wish. We've got company onboarding processes, key benefits of adoption by department, telling your finance, telling your procurement how it works. Our onboarding slides in multiple languages, recommended practice for compliance professionals, recommended engineering practices, reusing software and tooling overviews. Now this material was a bit scattered before, and it's tremendously useful. People have questions directly related to this, so now it's immediately discoverable. And I think that's one of the substantial benefits of this reorder. Now, this is a community, naturally, and while I've spent a lot of hours trying to put this together, if people hate it, we don't have to run with it. What I was trying to do was capture the intent, where we've talked about trying to consolidate the repositories, make it easier to discover, and create a holistic format to accomplish this goal. So I'd really appreciate if people could take a look at it and help provide feedback on how it works, how they think about it. Now I think because virtually all of OpenChain, apart from work team repositories, can be found in just 4 repositories. And the most important item for most companies is start to go into reference material. I believe it might accomplish what we wanted. So just pausing there, any comments, suggestions, ideas, or criticisms? All right. That falls under our usual silence is total agreement rule. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Git, essentially what I did was I created a new repository for reference material, a new repository for image assets, and so on. So as we were talking with Alexius, everything that was there is there, just the old repositories are marked archived. So at the moment, read-only, not designed for further development. And the reference material repository, which I will, if there's no strong objections, I will start to promote after this call, provides the platform for hopefully in the future allowing people to approach us as having a reference library covering everything from training to example processes to guidebooks. Okie dokie. We'll throw it open to the community at large and see what they think. Now, moving on, we had a quick walkthrough on that. The second item is new reference material, or to be more accurate, sometimes old reference material, which is now easier to discover and therefore it's the right time to work on it, or material I was sent recently, which I had been pending release until the repository was cleaned up. Let's look at the first. At the moment we don't have worksheets, but we have had a contribution. That M&A book that I mentioned contains worksheets and an appendix at the back, and they're pretty cool. Are you able to read the text on the call, or do I make it bigger? I'll make it bigger. Okay, so we have multiple worksheets which we can split off into individual worksheets in English, and then people can translate as needed. So these worksheets are designed for M&A, but naturally they're good for internal process analysis and so on. So just running through this worksheet quickly, you see the practice that should be there, the implementation level, and your notes or action items. So it's a really practical guide for going in and kicking the tires. The items here are what we all require. This is the type of thing OpenChain asks for, like third-party suppliers disclosing all open source software and their deliverables, audits, bill of materials, and so on. That's the first overarching worksheet, the discovery worksheet. And then there's the review and approval of open source software, kicking the tires on how the processes work. So for instance, does the organization make sure that all of the open source used in projects is under review and it's known what is happening with the licenses? Is there an open source review board to review and approve open source, and so on? All of these things are pretty practical, pretty simple, but important ways to review and approve open source software. Then there's the obligation satisfaction. That was actually the discussion with the French automotive company today about how do they make sure that they're meeting the license requirements. And this approaches it holistically. It's making sure that third parties are providing the necessary information. The company itself defines how it deals with external software triggers. The company has a process for satisfying obligations, and so on. And then moving on, we have a worksheet for community contributions, which is a hot topic at the moment in OpenChain. We have a section about contribution. We don't require contribution. We ask people to have an approach to contribution, to know what they're doing. And sometimes people ask, how does that work? Indeed, our German work group is going to make explicit material about corporate contributions, but this worksheet provides some really nice overview. So, for instance, that if you are contributing, the contributions are reviewed and approved according to a defined process. Determinations are made about whether it's suitable or not with regards contribution. Is it corporate? Is it not corporate? And various things like copyright ownership is clarified, so we know exactly what's going on. Okay, then we go on to policy. This is a hot topic, naturally. This is one of the key things that we have with our policy template. This again is asking that people would have a policy. It's championed internally, so it's communicated to the entire company, and the type of things that a policy should address, mostly stuff like roles and responsibilities. Then we have compliance staffing. Now, I know this is a lot of worksheets. I know I'm running through them quickly. I want to give you a holistic overview of the new mine of material we have. We don't have worksheets yet. This is great. This is public domain. Okay, so about having the right staffing in the compliance team, that they're trained, that the company identifies this properly. Then moving on, adapting business processes for open source to make sure that open source is at the heart of current processes. So it's about making sure that adjustments are made where appropriate. So one example here is that the supply chain management is tailored to ensure compliance requirements. So we're asking the right questions in procurement. Okay, then there's training worksheet. Again, no surprises here. It's all about having training and refreshing people on training periodically. Now this is something OpenChain as a spec deals with explicitly, but this check sheet is useful for a company to see where they're at and keep a record of it. Compliance process management, again, same deal. Responsibilities clear. The team responsible has proper visibility into product development and release plans, making sure that metrics are clearly defined and the organization knows what's happening in the community to address supply chain issues. And then we move on to software inventories. So again, this is pretty obvious, making sure that people know what software they've got there and they have mechanisms for making sure they keep knowing. Automation and tooling support, naturally, this is a key thing for our community right now. So here we are where a company assesses compliance processes to identify and prioritize opportunities. It makes sure that it engages with meetings and so on to keep on top of where the tools are going, and to make sure that the tools are tracking open source properly to closure, to make sure that the product released is the product expected. Then verification, of course. This is just requiring a company to think about how they verify things, making sure that the right things are verified, like source code license obligations, and making sure that the verified software is the software easily obtained internally and externally as appropriate. Process adherence audits, this is something that we don't cover in the spec. It's something that we do expect companies to have a process for, and this explains how that works naturally. And that's it. That's the run through. So we have a whole bunch of these worksheets to bring to life for formal release, and that's where I would like your help in review and improvement. This material is originally from Abraham, who has a great deal of experience in this type of thing, but I'd like to make sure that a lot of eyes, global eyes, take a look at this and make sure that it fits into the spirit of our community, in that any company in any market of any size would find these worksheets very useful for auditing where they're at. In other words, we don't make them too heavy, but we make them appropriate to make sure a company has the key requirements of a quality open source compliance program. I'll just pause here and see if anyone has any comments at this juncture.
Shane, it's Sammy. Is there any plan to actually provide a tool that enables us to do this rather than having a paper formatted worksheet?
I would think absolutely. it naturally would be a community effort, but turning this into a tool should be very easy, and we can probably use the same infrastructure as we use for the self-certification web app to create a web app.
I wasn't going to drop Gary into it, but and that's exactly what I was thinking.
Well, if we
Cinnamon template. I'm looking for more volunteers, by the way, to help maintain the site. So I should hold that up as a prerequisite. But I'd be happy to help.
Thank you, Gary.
And I believe that we have a promise from FOSSA to help out. So perhaps we could, they said they'd help out with the web app. So we could actually put this on their to-do list and say specifically this is an action item we'd like to see done.
Yeah, actually, we should add this as an issue on the application as an enhancement. So I'll. I'll go ahead and add that.
Now we need to sort of. You're right, Gary. But just to make it clear, I think rather than us maintaining it, it might be that we want to provide the tool as an open source tool for people to use in their individual organization. So that's what I was thinking. Unlike the certification, but yeah.
As opposed to an online tool, yeah.
Yeah, it's just I'm thinking in terms of maintenance of the data and so on. We probably, unlike the certification, we don't really have an interest in necessarily having or hosting that data. Whereas the tool itself, I think it's facilitating the OpenChain conformance anyway.
Yes, very good. Very good point. Yeah, I agree.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good point in that our formal infrastructure is tight. You know, we've got 2 people working as staff. We've got volunteers like Gary who go above and beyond, but our capabilities are limited versus the sheer amount of material and activity. And you know, probably our volunteers can bring this to life quickly, but maintaining it ongoing as a full service might be a burden that we don't want. Yeah. But we could definitely see if we can make this into a web app, and we could run a demonstration version that people could quickly see, and then they could get it running on their own infrastructure. Gary, what is our language for this? Is it Python or is it Java? I can't remember for the web app.
It's a Java web application currently.
Okay, so yeah,
it's a little heavier than you might desire for an on-premise solution, but it does scale nicely, and there's a lot. It's supported in a lot of different server infrastructures. So
yeah, I think that's a good point, Gary. I mean, it should work on any computer basically. Java just works, so it's easy to bring it in-house. Alrighty. Okay, so here's where I float an idea. Alexius, could you help kind of shepherd the review of the worksheet to see if it is appropriate as it is, or we should adjust it a little bit to make sure it works across multiple sectors and company sizes?
Sure, yeah, I'll be glad to.
Awesome. And Gary, could you chase FOSSA and see if they could work on this explicitly as a way to help us out?
Sure, I could ping them on that.
That'd be great. And if they have a look at our web app and adjust a version of it to do this, they may also make improvements that we incorporate in the main web app as well, which would be cool.
Yeah, and they may want to do a completely different implementation that's a little lighter weight as well. So we could just leave that flexible for them, and just suggest that there's interest in having this implemented and see how they respond.
Yeah, whatever floats their boat. It'd just be cool to bring it to life. Yeah. And this might also be one of those things where, as well as worksheets, as well as the potential for an app that people can use in-house, that there may be other formats that people want, and we'll try to respond through our global work groups and volunteers. Alrighty. Second item is another Ibrahim contribution. And this is something that is right on topic for where we're at the moment. I hope you can read that text. It shouldn't be too small. But in a nutshell, the metrics to evaluate and compare source code scanning tools. So this is right on the nose for our tooling group and for a lot of interest in the project. So the metrics laid out here are what Ibrahim flagged in material which he shared on Twitter under a CC BY license, but he's contributed it to us as CC0. So particularly valuable here would be user companies to say, does that look like what we did to choose our tools? And of course for the vendor companies to also look at it and say, is that what we've seen customers do when they're choosing tools? So I expect probably Oliver from Siemens to be an early reviewer on this, and also perhaps some of the team from FOSS-ID, I believe someone's on this call right now, might also be interested to look at this and talk about whether these metrics fit their known model. Alrighty. Does anyone have any thoughts on this kind of metric list for evaluating tools?
Where is it in the repo?
Oh, it's not yet. These are two new things which I'll commit to the repo tomorrow. I was kind of...
Okay.
I just finished organizing the repo 5 minutes before this call.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think it might be useful to revisit this actually once people have had a bit of a chance to review it. Shane.
So I'll.
I've seen the Twitter from Ibrahim, but I really have not had a chance to look more closely and sort of think a little bit about it myself.
That makes perfect sense. So I'll make sure this material is committed and easy to access, and I'll also follow up by email with attachments so people can quickly look at the tooling metrics slide and also the worksheets, which hopefully we can edit and produce as a worksheet series of documents and also as a web app. Alrighty.
Shane, just one suggestion on the specific contribution. I'm envisioning there's going to be a lot of discussion on this, especially from people who provide tools. It might be useful to put this into a markdown format that rather than a PDF or a slide, so that people can make specific suggestions and comment on more detailed elements of the document.
Yeah, that makes sense. So formats preferred, Markdown or other formats? Does anyone have preferences? All right. I guess we roll with Markdown on GitHub, which is fairly easy to run through and put in items.
This is Hans speaking. I have a question. What should be what's the role of OpenChain to publish this?
Oh, just our reference library. So we're not intended to be prescriptive or to say this is precisely the metric you should use, but rather to provide an example of the metrics that you could apply, that people do apply.
Because I see plenty of other things still missing, so I will appreciate the markdown and then we can add their discussion.
That's fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
It includes UI and no automation, so yeah.
Continuous integration,
yeah,
flexibility in the process, how you can integrate new process, can you run different process, role model. There's so many things. We have also a huge list, and I would like to share what we have here. So this is a good starting point, and I will add something more.
And then
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. You're right, and I think each one of us probably have some ideas and some thoughts. So having it and expanding it, and perhaps even digging a bit deeper into each of the items would be useful.
Yes.
But wouldn't it be more useful to pass it over to the tooling group? Because if we start including tooling information inside the reference, people will be confused, right? Especially if they're, disagree.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it does align more closely with the tooling group.
I would say it fits here, but it is just, we say these are different topics you should take a look at. It's not that everything is mandatory. So I'm totally fine with it. We say here are different scales, different ways how to take a look at your potential tool you want to evaluate. Here's some criteria. Select those you want to and ignore those you don't need.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are arguing that it won't be useful. It is just whether it would make more sense to put it near the tooling, sort of alongside the tooling, rather than here. So the same work would still be done and added.
My suggestion is that in the end, all of the material from all the work groups that provides references of any type should end up in our library. But perhaps kicking this over to the tooling group, which doesn't preclude anyone here engaging with it, is a good way to get immediate feedback. There's about 106 people there, if I recall correctly.
Let's start, and if it becomes an orphan, we can kick it out. But I think it will not become an orphan.
Yeah. I imagine that what might happen is the tooling group might bring it up in one of their calls and then run back to our GitHub and provide commentary and add-ins.
They can also make pull requests to our repositories, no problem, or they can copy it.
Exactly.
Just start.
Alrighty. I think that's a pretty good overview of what we can do. So worksheets, Alexios takes lead on the general review. Gary approaches FOSSA about app version. This metrics for the school tooling, again, it's pretty much the same deal. I added to GitHub. I'll hand over to our curriculum work team, essentially to have a look at this and see what people think. And our tooling work group will also, of course, contribute via our GitHub. Alrighty, that's nice progress. Okay, so after this, we're into the any other business section, and I happen to know we do have some any other business. Hans, if it's all right, I'll just hand over to you. You had a comment from, I think, Bosch internal lawyers about
Yes.
section 341.
Yes. So in the current specification under paragraph 3.4.1, with the compliance artifacts, everything is okay, but in the rational, my lawyers, they got a bit nervous because it says reasonable commercial efforts. And they would like to rephrase it to, as you can see, suggestion to ensure the compliance artifacts that accompany the supplied software we provided, prepared as required by the NIPA licenses. And the reason behind this is that, as you can see down in the text, it's an open source license has to be fulfilled in a binary way, yes or no. And if you're not willing to fulfill the open source license, you're not allowed to use the open source. So they do not want to have the word reasonable efforts in a standard when it might be against the strictly applicable law. That's the problem they have. So they do not like to have the term reasonable commercial efforts, because this is something everybody can say, my commercial effort was enough, I will not give you anything. That's the worst case. And the license enforces that you have to fulfill it or not.
So I think this language came about because people have recognized that open source is often ill documented on licensing, and that no one can ever really be sure of 100% compliance. And that the idea was that because open source is a little bit on the flexible side when it comes to licensing, I'll refer to it as, the intent was to say, we want to make sure that you're giving it a good, a reasonable commercial effort. I think that's terminology that I sometimes see in legal documents as well. But I'll leave it up to others to comment what they think about the wording.
So, Mark, I think my recollection, you're right. I think the issue we had originally is that we know that there is quite a lot of open source out there, and it's really extremely difficult to establish the applicable licenses. Interestingly, last week we had a discussion about containers compliance and the enormity of the problem there, with the best will, given that things get pulled in, and that was meant to capture that just acknowledging that a company could have a really good process and do everything by the book, but still, despite all of that, they end up missing some license components in some of the files that they distribute.
Yeah, and I think sometimes.
Sorry,
go ahead, please.
I concur with Sammy on that, and I think one particular problem as far as dependencies is concerned, and you may also find that you take a component on board, you do everything that you is commercially reasonable to determine what the compliance artifacts are, but ultimately, through no fault of your own, it turns out that particular component contains some other subcomponent that you are unaware of, and maybe you haven't attached a notice file or something that technically you would be able to. So strict liability would essentially mean that you have to be psychic. I think that goes sort of way.
It's not. I give you two examples. One example is if you use open source, for example, you use a Linux kernel and you forgot that you have to mention that there's a copyright of Patrick McCarty, he will pull you to court.
No, I'm not saying about forgetting. I'm sorry, you misunderstand me.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about forgetting you have to do it. What I'm saying is that if some of Patrick McCarty's code is taken by a third party and put into a component, that component is placed on GitHub, and it says that it's copyright Sam Smith, so you fulfill what you believe your obligations are by acknowledging Sam Smith's copyright and following the license. But it turns out that through no fault of your own, there is some GPL code that belongs to Patrick McCarty, and you haven't followed the requirements there. There's no way that you're able to find out that there's an issue until Patrick McCarty comes along and tries to sue you. So that's the sort of situation where I think it's not reasonable to expect you to be psychic and exercise strict liability on that particular point.
Yeah, and I think that's the more classic. That's a great example, by the way. But I think a classic example is when you have a copy file at the top and no license information in all the hundreds of files below it. Yet you don't know if someone grabbed something from another project of similar structure with a copy at the top, and there were two different licenses. So, but this is a very common.
Your example, if you have a copyright notice on GitHub, and you take it as it is, and you provide this copyright notice to your customer, and you expect that this is correct, then you did something which is you fulfilled the licenses. We have currently a huge supplier which is currently referencing this specification and says, for us, it's not reasonable commercial efforts to provide you with any information because it's too much work for us. And they say we will do this for you because it's a huge supplier and they are OpenChain compliant. And they say we do not do this because for us it's not commercially reasonable to do this.
But wouldn't that, this is Russ, wouldn't that come down to commercial terms then, beyond our specification for OpenChain?
Yeah, exactly. exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
I mean,
talking about broad guidance and not being prescriptive. I think the specification does an incredible job of that. In my experience, as someone from the OEM side, a lot of the things you're discussing are handled in commercial terms.
Yeah, but our suggestion says here, as you can see, you provide the software as required by the identified licenses. And you just say, I identified the phone license because I downloaded it from GitHub, and it says in the copyright notice, this is it, I'm done. It's actually, there's no change in it. In any company who is following compliance is doing its best, and not reasonable commercial effort is doing its best to fulfill licenses it identifies. And we can now discuss about the level of identification, how deep you have to go, but for us it's more important that you say, okay, we do everything what we know what is in the product.
But you're wanting to prove a negative. I think if you felt comfort in putting your legal terms in your legal contract, you should be able to get them to come to you on your definition of reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supply contract. I think that's correct. I think the supply contract is the place for defining, specifically what level of liability is applicable and the extent to which the research needs to have been done in terms of whether you have determined whether there's the sort of code hidden within some other code that might have some compliance artifacts that need to be supplied as well. I don't think it's appropriate that this is contained within the OpenChain specification. I mean, there might be. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, and I have to say, if a supplier came to me and said, actually, we haven't done it because it's too much work, to me that definitely falls below what I would consider as commercially reasonable effort.
Yeah.
And they say the risk is not high. Yeah, there's no big risk, and if there's something, they pay for it. And it's a bit annoying because also when you discuss, so for example, if I take open source from a GitHub repository and you do not invest any time to identify what's in there, you save a lot of time if you take open source. And this time can be, amount of this time you save can be used on compliance. And this is what I expect from a company. So I'm also not only my lawyers are not very happy also, I'm not very happy with the reasonable commercial effort because it's used against us and also against other companies. So, my suggestion is again the suggestion that we should change this according to this to ensure the compliance to everything that's identified licenses.
So I'll leave the terminology in, and I'll note that not this is a suggestion at the moment, and I'm noting that there are a number of people who feel like it should be in there. You have your position. I think it's worthy if we could hear a slightly broader audience. But I think the one point to take away from here is you still have you have the power, but it's through a different avenue, right? You do have the power.
Yes.
So I would work with you legal and explain that, but I think we need to do is have this as a slightly broader viewing, and then we can see where it goes. Okay.
So I can make an issue in the GitHub for this.
That'll be
perfect.
Discuss it.
I'm totally fine with this, but I would like to discuss it first with you, and I will also write down my rationale behind this, or my reasoning, and
absolutely,
yes, I'm totally fine with it. We can discuss it.
That would be great.
That's fantastic. I think we've got 6 open issues right now on spec, so it'll fit nicely into kind of a manageable list of items for us to talk through.
Yes. So the intent was actually to use the upcoming Linux member conference as kind of a moment where we're going to kick off the next revision. We'll start going through the whole cycle again. We were laying low. We wanted the dust to settle. We have something that's ready to go in front of the ISO organization, but now we are also ready to move forward and start this cycle off again. Okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
But thank you for that.
Awesome. Okay, so do we have any further business? Alrighty. We're finishing pretty much exactly on time.